All right, let's dive into the single most destructive conflict in all of human history, the Second World War. We're going to trace its path from the simmering tensions that basically set the world on fire, all the way to the new world that had to rise up from its ashes. So, how did one single, devastating war completely redraw the map of the 20th century, and really everything that came after? That's the big question we're going to try and understand together. To really get a grip on World War II, you can't just start in 1939. Nope, we have to rewind, back to the end of World War I, because the seeds of this new war weren't just planted in the 1930s, they were sown in the very treaty that was supposed to end all wars for good. So you have the Treaty of Versailles. It was supposed to be about peace, right? But for nations like France, who were desperate for security after being invaded by Germany twice, it meant sticking Germany with crippling payments and taking away huge chunks of their land. For the Germans, all this delivered was a deep, burning sense of national humiliation, and that created the perfect breeding ground for some really extreme ideas. And this timeline just shows how quickly everything spiraled out of control. The economic crash in 1929 created this global despair, which let figures like Adolf Hitler come to power in 1933, promising to make Germany great again. By 1939, that promise had twisted into pure aggression. The invasion of Poland, well, that was the final spark that set all of Europe ablaze. So, with war declared, Germany's initial aggression just snowballed into this incredible wave of conquest. For a while there, the Axis powers looked completely unstoppable. And the main drivers behind this expansion were the three nations of the Axis alliance. Over in Europe, you had Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, who wanted to dominate the continent. And in Asia, Imperial Japan was trying to build its own massive empire. Their goals, together, threatened the entire world. Germany's incredible success was powered by this terrifying new military strategy, Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. And this wasn't just about raw force. It was a direct answer to the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I. It was all about speed and shock, combining air power, fast-moving tanks, and infantry to cause psychological collapse as much as physical defeat. It let Germany just roll over most of Europe at a speed that was just breathtaking. For a while, it really seemed like an Axis victory was inevitable. But, and this is a big but, a series of absolutely critical mistakes were about to completely change the momentum of the war. The tide was about to turn. The first massive turning point was Hitler's decision in 1941 to invade the Soviet Union. It was a colossal strategic blunder. It opened up this vast, brutal Eastern Front that would just bleed the German army dry of men and supplies for the next 4 years. Meanwhile, on the complete opposite side of the world, Germany's ally, Japan, made its own fateful move. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. They were hoping to knock out American power in the Pacific in one swift blow. But the attack did the exact opposite of what Japan wanted. America had been kind of staying out of it, though they were supplying the Allies. Pearl Harbor changed everything. It woke the sleeping giant. The very next day, the United States declared war, and just like that, the separate wars in Europe and Asia merged into one single, truly global struggle. And with America's industrial power now fully in the fight, the war exploded onto new fronts. The Pacific became this massive theater of huge naval battles and these brutal island-hopping campaigns, just one bloody island assault after another to get closer to Japan. And at the same time, in North Africa, you had these huge tank armies from both sides clashing across the desert, fighting for control of the Suez Canal. So, with the tide turned, the Allies began the long, bloody push to roll back the Axis conquests and to close in on their capital cities. The beginning of the end in Europe came on June 6, 1944, a day we all know. D-Day. Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, storming the beaches of Normandy in France. This finally opened that Western Front everyone had been waiting for and began the liberation of France. So now Germany is being squeezed like a vice. You have the Americans and British pushing from the west and the massive Soviet army pushing from the east. The Nazi regime just crumbled. In the spring of 1945, Soviet soldiers fought their way right into the heart of Berlin, which led to Hitler's suicide and Germany's unconditional surrender. So, the war in Europe was over, but the fighting was still raging in the Pacific. Its end wouldn't just bring peace. It would kick off an entirely new global era, one with new powers, new fears, and new attempts to keep the peace. To force an end to the war, and to avoid what would have been an incredibly bloody invasion of Japan itself, the United States unleashed a new, world-altering weapon. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Faced with this terrifying new level of destruction, Japan surrendered. World War II was finally over. But the peace came at a cost that is just staggering. It's impossible to know the exact number, but historians estimate that over 60 million people, soldiers and civilians, lost their lives. It's a number so vast, it's almost impossible to really comprehend. The legacy of that war is, in many ways, the world we live in right now. Out of all that unimaginable destruction, two competing superpowers rose up, the United States and the Soviet Union, and their rivalry defined the Cold War. And, in a global effort to make sure catastrophe like this could never happen again, the United Nations was founded, creating a whole new framework for how countries deal with each other. This war showed us the absolute worst of human cruelty, but it also showed us the greatest heights of courage and sacrifice. And it's a history that forces us all the way back to our final question. When you look at the world today, have we truly learned its lessons?